Andrea, I serve on the Budget Committee and on the Appropriations Committee, and I can tell you one thing: this budget, quite frankly, it's immoral, and it's sinister. When you look at the fact that we said early on, Democrats which did not vote, we did not vote for the tax cut. We said that we would see huge cuts in Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. Guess what? This budget verifies that.
In a world of vetoes by tweet and open clashes with Congress, Donald Trump's 2020 budget managed to slip under the radar this week. But we took a look at the proposal, which is being rejected by both parties. Trump's budget makes $2.7 trillion in cuts to non-defense programs. That includes slashing funds from key programs that actually help our economy grow, such as healthcare, education, and agriculture. Joining me now is Gene Sperling, former National Economic Advisor to President Obama, as well as President Clinton. And Gene, great to see you. Thanks for being here this morning.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Joy. It's been a great show so far.
I'm not hearing you. Hopefully you'll pop back into my ear. You wrote a piece, Gene, that was called Economic Dignity. And you wrote it for the Democracy Journal. And I'll read just a little bit of it. It says, at a moment when the very capacity of modern capitalism to avoid accelerating inequality, a hollowed-out middle class, structural poverty, and growing economic insecurity is being questioned, we should be stepping back to reflect on what is precisely the ultimate economic goal that we aspire to. Just describe a little bit why you wrote the piece and what brought it on.
Well, you know, I think people think economics has to be confusing, that it has to be about metrics, GDP, you know, debt as a percentage of the economy. You know, what it's really about is, what is your ultimate goal? What's your ultimate goal for lifting up people? And what I wanted to say, as someone who's been in this, is that our ultimate goal, our North Star, should be the economic dignity of all people. And I wanted to lay out what that actually meant and how that applied to policy. And so I put down 3 pillars. One is that not only should a person who contributes be able to care for their family, but they should be able to enjoy the greatest, most fulfilling moments in life, the birth of their child, taking care of a sick parent, without it being denied by economic deprivation. Number 2, none of it, government can't guarantee our happiness, but all of us should be able to pursue our potential and our sense of purpose, even if we need first, second, and third chances. And third, we should be able to participate in the economy without a sense of domination or humiliation. And what I said is, the ultimate metric you want to think about is, what does a person on their deathbed, what would they say mattered most in their economic life? And that should be our North Star. And so what I tried to do was lay that out, and then try to say how that would apply to different policies, how that might make you realize that something maybe like paid family and medical leave is really a very important issue, because if part of your economic dignity is being able to be there for your child or be there for a sick parent, then that's pretty important. And health care as a right is not just important to the person who has the health care. Think about a parent. What could hurt your economic dignity more than a sense that you had a very ill child and you could not care for them, or you had to bankrupt your family trying?
And you know, it's interesting that you made the point about what do you want to be remembered for, what do you want to look back on. And I think about when Donald Trump puts together a budget like this with his team, and he cuts Medicare, which is healthcare for the elderly, by $845 billion. Medicaid by $1.5 trillion for the poorest people in this country. When the safety net cuts for TANF are slashed 13%, SNAP, which used to be called food stamps, down more than 30%. When those kind of things happen, I just wonder, what does that say about the country that this would even be considered? Because it's not that different than the old Paul Ryan budgets.
Well, you know, it's a little bit just like I was saying. Budgets can seem technical, people's eyes can glaze over, but they really are a value statement. They're not much different than the value statement a family makes and how they decide to use their budget. And also, you have to look at the full Trump budget. Let's start with, they decided that it was okay to spend $2 trillion on a tax cut that went overwhelmingly to the largest companies, gave them a tax cut from 35% to 21%, gave the top 1% a lower bracket. So you have to compare, what are your values when you'll spend $2 trillion on that, but then at the same time, you turn around and you say, we can afford, we want to cut Medicaid by hundreds of billions. And forget those numbers. Think about what that means. Millions of Americans losing their health care, millions of Americans struggling to get by, perhaps becoming bankrupt. As you said, the food security. But also, I want to talk about how it hurts everyone. They're cutting $200 billion in student loan help. They've decided that they can lower tax rates for major corporations, but they're going to raise interest rates on students at a time when the student debt issue is one of the greatest moral and economic issues we have. Another thing you said buried in this budget, a 12% cut for National Institute of Health and a 10% cut for the Center for Disease Control. Are Americans out there saying, well, boy, we need to give, Amazon a tax cut, but we should cut the funding and research we're doing for someday finding cures for cancer and Alzheimer's? I don't think so. This really does defy, I think, a very basic value statement, and I really hope more Democrats and more of the candidates talk about it and talk about it in those terms.
And at the same time, though, it's bizarre to me to think that this is an issue that only Democrats should care about. I mean, you think about those things that you talked about that will hurt Americans will also hurt Trump voters. And yet, Yamiche Alcindor, who works for PBS, was on with the great Ali Velshi this week, and he asked her, when you're out there talking with Donald Trump's voters who will be hurt by some of these same policies, what do they say? And let you hear how she responded.
I have interviewed a bunch of Trump supporters who even as they are hurt by programs that President Trump cut or taken away, that they somehow still turn to the Republicans and say, this party better reflects my values than Democrats. So while farmers are probably going to be very upset at not only the trade issues, but also the immigration issues, where we're hearing stories where farmers can't even get employees to pick their fields, there's this idea that I think his base is still sticking with him, so that could still happen.
People are willing to burn their lives down in order to have what? What are people getting in exchange for having their own economic lives destroyed?
Well, I mean, it's exactly right. I mean, for example, not to keep going to numbers, but there's a 15% cut in Department of Agriculture. They're not just cutting food stamps, they're cutting conservation programs, crop subsidies. At the same time, these same people are suffering from his reckless and irrational, at times, trade policies. But I think what it does show, and I think it is important, is that you do have to talk about those end goals. Get out of the ideology and talk about what does it mean for your economic dignity. Think about pre-existing conditions. When that was an ideological issue, government market, are you for Obama, against Obama, it was a controversial issue. But when people focused on, do you believe somebody in your family, because they have a child with a disability or a spouse with a condition, should not be able to change health care, should get their prices jacked up? When it was put in those terms, the public overwhelmingly supported the protection from the Affordable Care Act, the protections for pre-existing conditions. So I think we all have to do better on getting to that ultimate impact on people, because I think if we do, they will see that Donald Trump has betrayed all Americans, that he is dividing us, he is not for us, he is not supporting people's economic dignity, and the type of idea progressives are putting forward on health care as a right, on paid family leave, on helping people when they've lost a job have a second chance, or even have a first chance. That's the type of thing that will be good economically, but also speak to people's heart and values.
Right. Gene Sperling, thank you so much. It's such a treat to talk to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And coming up,